This presentation is brought to you by Arizona State University's Global Institute of Sustainability and a generous investment by Julie Ann Wrigley. Wrigley Lecture Series. World-renowned thinkers and problem solvers engage the community in dialogues to address sustainability challenges.
Great, thanks. I want to welcome everyone here to one of our Wrigley Lectures for 2013. I'm Bob Melnick, the Executive Dean of the Global Institute of Sustainability. I know many of you are returnees to the lecture series, and some of you are new. We're especially excited about our speaker tonight, which you'll hear more about in a moment. The Wrigley Lecture Series is underwritten by our benefactor, Julie Wrigley, and each year we bring to campus or to the community, as in this case, the lecture series in which we have 4 very distinguished practitioners and scholars of sustainability talk to people in our university, in our community, and actually from throughout the country about important issues in sustainability practice, scholarship, and challenges, if you will. Tonight, we're also happy to tell you that the selection of this particular speaker tonight was done in concert with the Stardust Center for Affordable Homes and the Family. Normally, the Wrigley Speaker Series is selected by a committee internal to the university. But in this case, because of the importance of affordable housing and the family, and the fact that Stardust is now part of the Global Institute of Sustainability, we called upon the Stardust Advisory Board. Some of you are here tonight, and I want to thank each of you for giving us suggestions, including our speaker this evening. During the course of 2013, we're going to have 4 Wrigley speakers, and each hails from a different continent, which is part of our effort to put the G in GEOS, the Global Institute of Sustainability. I'm not going to talk any longer. What I want to do is simply welcome you and introduce Aaron Golub. Aaron is a senior sustainability scientist with the Global Institute of Sustainability and also an assistant professor in the School of Geographical Sciences and Urban Planning. And Aaron will introduce our guest speaker tonight. Aaron?
It's a real honor to introduce our guest tonight, and I'm also going to thank first our Wrigley Lecture crew, Lauren, Jenny, Mindy, and Meredith, and the others who are helping to record the session. I'm just going to give a short intro, about a minute and a half, about Enrique's impact on transportation planning. His impact goes far beyond just that. He's, of course, well known for being the mayor of Bogota, Colombia between 1998 and 2001. His impact on that city of 7 million created an example which took the world by storm. His innovation was simply asking questions like, how do we want to live? And those aren't issues like measuring CO2 or travel or anything like that. Besides asking simple questions, he provided bold and simple solutions. He knew that a well-designed bus system giving buses dedicated lanes, called bus rapid transit, would carry as many people as light rail at a much lower cost. It did. He knew that there was pent-up demand for cycling, and with the proper infrastructure, demand would follow. It did. He implemented these solutions at unprecedented scales in a city, well, one of the densest cities in the Western Hemisphere. His example had big impacts. Of the roughly 4,000 kilometers of BRT systems in the world today, a planning approach that's really been around for about 50 years. 3/4 of them have been implemented since the Bogota's opening in 2000. In fact, the U.S. Federal Transit Administration went down to Bogota to study what these innovations were being developed in the so-called developing world. And now we have systems in the U.S. from Boston to Los Angeles. Even here in Tempe, we have our rural road BRT system to thank Enrique for. On a personal note, 10 years ago, I had the pleasure of introducing Enrique to a similar audience in Brazil. Of course, the aim was then, as it is today, for some of his message to have an impact. So Enrique, maybe we'll invite you back in 10 years to see how we're doing. Enrique has a bachelor's degree in history and economics, a master's in management, a doctorate in public administration. He's been a visiting scholar at NYU. He is currently the president of the board of directors of the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, He's won too numerous of awards to mention for his various initiatives. But in 2009, with the Dalai Lama and 48 others, he was named Whitney Reader's 50 Visionaries Who Are Changing the World. Enrique Peñalosa.
Thank you very much, Aaron, for your exaggerated presentation. I am very thankful to you for this invitation and to all of you, and I'm very happy to be here at Arizona State and sharing with you some ideas. So we are going to just, I hope to get you to be in radical disagreement with at least a few of the things I say. First, I'd like to put this into context for the United States. Whatever happens in the United States has profound impact all over the world, from jeans to iPods to music. So I think the Americans have a special responsibility towards the world. If they can do something that will make the world more sustainable, this will have tremendous impact in the rest of the world. Unfortunately, so far, the United States is a leader in many, many areas, science, university, academics, but one where it really is not is in the urban structure. That's one where, on the contrary, tends to be a bad example. And not because any reason different than that the fact that the United States was the most successful society in the 20th century. So if others would have loved to do the same suburbs, car-based suburbs, except they could not because they did not have the economic success. But now, there will be 2.7 billion more people in the world cities over the next 38 years. Is this working, this microphone? No? There will be 2.7 billion more people in the world cities. Of course, in India and on China and all that, we know it's going to be very big. What is maybe not so clear is that in the US, this will be similar as well. And I want to show you something. It will increase, according to the United States Census Bureau, from 322 million today to 438 million in 2050. But now we have 2.58 persons per household in the United States. Let's assume, as it is going down, the size of households in the United States, that we will have, like in Germany, 2.2 persons per household in 40 years, which is nothing very radical. So if those two things happen, you will need in the United States 74.3 million new homes in the next 38 years. We will need 74 million new homes in the United States. That means that over the next 38 years, the United States needs to build more homes than all homes existing today in the United Kingdom, France, and Canada added together. So this is not a China challenge, it's an American challenge. So the question is, how are those cities going to be built and where? And this is a little bit where I'd like to get today. Now, when we talk about transport, can we propose a transport system without knowing what kind of city we want? I don't think so, because I am invited to work on transport in many cities, but the first thing I tell you, what kind of city you want, because it's very different if what you have in mind is something like Houston or Phoenix, than if what you have in mind is more something like Amsterdam or Copenhagen. So what do you want? That even before we know what kind of city we want, we really have to know how do we want to live. Because a city is only a means to a way of life. A city is a means to a way of life. So when we are designing a city, what we really are designing is a way of life. What kind of life will make us happier? That is the issue. Now, there are some very basic principles of equality. I think equality is fundamental, and I'm not going to go into the details, but clearly some people thought after communist collapse that we could forget about equality. However, I think this is wrong. We have been seeking equality since more than 2,000 years in Greece, Rome, the Judeo-Christian Revolution. For the last 300 years, millions and millions of people died in the American Revolution to the Soviet Revolution. I mean, so I don't think we can forget about equality, but clearly we cannot have income equality with market economy. So what kind of equality can we hope for? I would propose that we can have two kinds of equality. First, equality of quality of life, at least for children. Even the most radical Tea Party ruled society could have equality of quality of life for children, or should be able to. And the second one, the first article of all constitutions, all democratic constitutions, says all citizens are equal before the law. This is not just poetry. If all citizens are equal before the law, for example, a bus with 80 passengers has a right to 80 times more road space than a car with one. This is, or somebody on a bicycle has the same right as somebody to road space as somebody in a car. And also, there is a consequence of this principle, which is explicit in some constitution, implicit in all, which is that public good prevails over private interest. Democracy is not just the fact that people vote. You could have people voting and not have democracy. Democracy means that the Constitution is obeyed, that principles such as this we are talking about are obeyed. So sometimes we have injustice is before our noses and we don't see it. For example, we think today that what happened in the French Revolution was very obvious, that this should have changed. It was not so obvious because 1,000 years had gone by and it had not changed. But let's not go back so far as the French Revolution. 70 years ago, African Americans had to give their seats in buses to white people here in the United States. 70 years ago, women could not vote for president in the United States. So, and it was not fascists who thought women should not vote. It was your grandparents, your great-grandparents. They thought it was normal that women should not vote. So, sometimes inequality, injustice is before our noses and we do not see it. And what do I mean by this? Examples. For example, I think that a traffic jam road without exclusive lanes for buses is a flagrant symbol of injustice and inequality and technical stupidity. It does not take a PhD from Arizona State University. A committee of 12-year-old children would realize in 20 minutes that the most efficient way to use scarce road space is with exclusive lanes for buses. But moreover, if public good prevails over private interest, for example, clearly there should not be private waterfronts. Actually, the United States defends mostly open ocean waterfronts as public, but there are, for example, thousands of miles of Long Island Sound waterfront, which if they were public, with public pedestrian infrastructure, clearly public good would improve. Millions and millions of people would be much happier. So this society is far from being finished. It's not so perfect, even in democratic terms. But we have sometimes injustices that, again, today, the same way as we think today is normal, that there should be a private waterfront where other people are not allowed, they are not allowed access. In the same way, 80 years ago, people thought it was normal that women should not vote. So injustice and non-democratic realities are before our noses, so that we are so used to them that we think this is normal. But I think they will change, and I hope they will change soon. I like this image of planet Earth because then we realize how our planet really is a spaceship, a self-sufficient spaceship, and we are so together, close together. We all are humans until we come down to Earth, and then we see some rules such as the ones that were enacted in Arizona recently against immigrants to come into the United States or so. So clearly then it's not really, we don't share Earth all together as equals, you know. Especially we Colombians, we have a lot of trouble to get visas to most countries in the world. So in fact, out of this whole universe, out of this whole planet, we only have a right to be inside our country's borders. Other countries may give us permission to go to their countries, but we only have a right to be in our countries. But even in our country, we come inside our country, and then we realize almost everything is private property, so we cannot enter it. You enter private property, and you may even get killed. You go into your city and you enter some other people's apartment or something and you may get shot. It's not a minor risk. You come out to the street and then you'll get killed by cars. So why all this long story? Just to emphasize that out of the whole universe, out of the whole planet, the only place to which we have access, to which we have rightful access, is public pedestrian space in our city. Public pedestrian space in our city is the only piece of the planet to which we have access. Maybe a few more parks here and there, but that's basically, so it's a very important part of the planet, and that's basically the most important part of any city. But we will see soon that actually most cities give more space to park cars than to pedestrian space. Now, what is a good city then? I love a definition by Jan Gehl, as a wonderful Danish urbanist, who says a good city is one where people like to be out in public space. Not in shopping malls, no, they won't want to stay at home watching TV. They like to be out, watching other people in plazas, in parks. That's what a good city is, where rich and poor meet as equals in parks, in public transport, so we could survive inside an apartment, the same way a bird survives inside a cage. But we suppose the bird would be happier in a cage the size of this auditorium, and happier yet flying free. In the same way, maybe we are happier in a 10-meter wide sidewalk than in a 2-meter wide sidewalk. But here we come into something that is very interesting about cities. Cities are more architecture than engineering. Cities are more art. See, this ceiling could be at this height, you know, maybe 4 meters high, and we could be meeting here, and functionally would work, but we would feel something different in our heart, in our soul. We would feel different. Feeling is not irrelevant. In the same way, I cannot prove that it's better to have a 10-meter wide sidewalk than to have a 2-meter wide sidewalk. I cannot prove mathematically. This is not an engineering. This they will not teach you in an engineering course. This is something you will feel. So much about cities is subjective. The way, and unfortunately or fortunately, it's society that must make, through government, many decisions. I am very happy that some of the planners from the city are here. But for example, heights of buildings, 30-story high or 2-story high, there is no mathematical rule for this to be decided or not. And yet we need to have this rule. We cannot let the private sector do whatever they want in their development, to make the sidewalk as big as they want when they do a building, or to the height of, so public space. Public space. We need also in a good city to have contact with nature, with water, with trees. A good city is good for vulnerable cities. I would say that a good city is one that is good for children, for the elderly, for the handicapped, for the poor. If it's good for them, it will tend to be good for everybody else. Almost, I would say that children and the elderly by themselves in public pedestrian space is almost a species, an indicator species for a good city. The same way that if we find water in a mountain and we find trout are indicator species that the water is clean. It has enough oxygen. So if a city is really good, you will find a lot of children in the street by themselves, not without the parents, not with their parents. This wonderful city like in the Netherlands, Groningen. Now, cars. Cars have two kinds of problems. One is quality of life. Cars kill people. It's not a minor problem, you know. Tens of thousands of people are killed by cars every year. But the other one is simply technical. You know, as cities are growing, you can make room, all the room you want, and simply it's not possible to solve mobility with cars, as we will see, especially in the giant developing country cities. There is a conflict. We can design a city that is friendly to people or a city that is friendly to cars, but you cannot do one that is both. This is simply, there are conflicts. How do you distribute this space? Cars above, cars below, they were very nice to leave some space for people there. You know, high velocity roads are like fences in a field, in a pasture. You cannot go across. So the more roads that you cannot cross, your freedom is restricted. You have noise, so clearly it's less humane. It would be much nicer if this road was for human beings, if this road was just 2 lanes, and much nicer if it was pedestrian. I mean, maybe you need the road, but the fact is that it has a significant cost in human quality of life. If we tell a 3-year-old child anywhere in the world today, watch out, a car, the child will jump in fright. And with a good reason, because there are tens of thousands of children who are killed by cars every year in the world. But the amazing thing is not that this happened. The amazing thing is that we think this is normal, that this is progress, that this is the way life is. This was not always like this. We have had cities for about 5,000 years. And for 5,000 years, I mean, maybe not on a bicycle like in this old Chinese city, any child could go out without any fear of getting killed. It's only in the last 80 years that we have created human environments where people have to be afraid of dying. It's not a minor threat. This is progress. After 5,000 years, that's the best we can do. Some horrible streets. So we come out of the building and then we find a street right in front where the children can get killed. Or we also, if we are not careful. This is normal, noisy, dangerous. This is the wonderful human environment we have created after 5,000 years of history. This is Tokyo in the Middle Ages. A child could walk without any fears, any blocks without any fear. Then Modena, for example, in Italy. Let's see, very advanced society. Sometimes we tend to think that before cars we lived in caves. No. 200 years before cars were invented, Beethoven had composed his music. You know, there was science, there was art. It was not like before cars people lived in like a, this is Berlin, for example. People could walk. Paris, almost 1900, very sophisticated city. It was not exactly a cave, This is, and so New York, 1905. I think the 20th century will be remembered as a wrong detour in urban history. I think I hope that in 2,200 people will say, how could people in 2013 live? It was such a horrible place. The same way we think today of London, 1800, as a terrible place to live, yet in 1800 London was the most admired city in the world, the most imitated city in the world. So this is what we have created, these human habitats. Now, we have these urbanists who are called the new urbanists, whom I respect very much because they have done a wonderful work. But basically, I think in the United States, many urban experts have idealized the first half of the 20th century city. It was so wonderful. People, the neighbors knew each other. The shops were close by, mixed use, so wonderful. But I mean, if they were so wonderful, why did everybody leave as soon as they could when they had cars? I mean, as soon as they could, they left for the suburbs. So maybe it was not so wonderful. They were escaping from cars. They were escaping, and we will see about this a little later. Look, this is a wonderful book by Peter Norton. He says, before 1920, American pedestrians crossed streets wherever they wished, walked in them, and let their children play in them. In 1914, the Chamber of Commerce in Rome, New York, had to ask pedestrians not to visit in the street and not to manicure your nails on the streetcar tracks, with limited success. So, the city of the first half of the 20th century was fine before cars appeared. In fact, in the same book, it says in 1907, in 1900, there were no Americans killed by cars in 1900. But in the 1920s, motor vehicle accidents in the United States killed more than 200,000 people, almost the same as Americans killed in the Second World War. In 10 years, when 20 years before, not one single person had been killed by cars. So something radical changed, but we should have changed completely the way we did cities. As soon as these killing machines appeared, we should have made cities where one street was for cars, the next only for pedestrians. One street for cars, the next, or something different. But no, we just made bigger streets, bigger roads, highways, and we continue the same as if nothing had changed. And everything has changed. Streets were the playgrounds for most cities' children, but in the 1920s, street games were becoming high-stakes gamble. In 1925, in the United States, cars and trucks killed about 7,000 children. And that was 1/3 of the death toll. So something changed when cars appeared, but we seem to have assumed that nothing changed. We just made the same kind of cities, houses against the street now. And those Americans went to the suburbs to escape cars. At the beginning of the century, you know, if you go to all the great cities, he doesn't like what I'm saying. You know, any city before cars, the wealthiest people had the homes in the main arteries. I am sure if Phoenix existed in 1920 in a big city, as it did, that the rich people had their homes in the main street. It was the same in Bogota, in Ahmedabad in India, in Paris, everywhere. As soon as cars appeared, the rich go as far as they can to the farthest out suburb or wherever. So this is like in Manhattan. The main houses of the billionaires were in the main streets. No? And people, they like to show before cars. Also, apartments in the first floor were the most expensive ones. And not just because there were no elevators, because elevators had existed for about 60 years already. But as soon as cars appeared, then the most expensive apartments begin the penthouse, as far from the street as possible, 20-story high. Is more expensive. And even in suburbs, you see the cul-de-sac. When you have a cul-de-sac, a closed street, the house that is farthest from the entrance of the cul-de-sac is the most expensive. That's the most preferred lot, because that's, even though it's a minimum traffic, is the one that has the least traffic, the least risk of children getting killed by cars. So, see, it's clearly the way things change. Now, but cars destroyed the city, but also cars made it possible to leave the city, because once people had cars, they could go to the suburbs and go to a place where they liked better. Now, and clearly, of course, we began to make cities for cars and highways, and we made a mess. By the end of the last century, we realized we had made a mess, and we began to correct it. To make, especially in Europe, we began to make streets for pedestrians, all over the place, all over. There is not one single European city or town which does not have a whole network of pedestrian streets only. This is a fantastic one in San Sebastián in Spain, and Santiago in Chile. And even in New York, this is 2 years ago, they took half the space from Broadway to give it to pedestrians and bicycles. And part of it was, this is not for a Sunday celebration. They closed totally Broadway altogether. And this is the tendency all over the world. When we talk about transport policy, to a secretary of transport in an advanced city translates how to reduce car use. In the developing countries, still the opposite, how to solve traffic jams. I heard this morning something very shocking, and here it seemed they talk like a developing world city, because they said they wanted to make a bigger I-17. This is a typical developing world talk, you know, not to see how you can reduce car use, but on the contrary, how can you make more room for cars. Now, quality sidewalks. Quality sidewalks are the most important element of a democratic city's infrastructure. This is typical of the developing world. This clearly shows that this is first-class citizens and this is third-class citizens. You know, sidewalks, besides, is an integral part of public transport. If we want to use people to use public transport, we have to make nice sidewalks for people to walk to the bus station. Or, you know, but this is a funny picture, but this is all over the developing world is like this. You don't have to seek very hard. This is almost a character. What makes a difference between advanced and backward cities is not subways or highways in terms of, is quality sidewalks. See, they make this horrible flyover, useless by the way, and then they forget to make a sidewalk for people. This is in India, in Chennai, but it could be anywhere. You know, this is typical, you know, not even children are more important than cars. You know, China is a disaster in most of its cities. American suburbs tend to think it's very elegant not to have sidewalks. You know, it's fancy, you know, it looks rural, you know. It's funny because even in Canada, where they have a lot of suburbs, for example, there always are sidewalks. This is Colombia, typical a mess, you know, Bogota. And then I was almost impeached. I had my hair black before these battles. You know? So people told me, Mayor, you're so stubborn because there is enough space for cars to park as well as for people to walk by. So we had to tell people, look, we tend to think that sidewalks are relatives of streets because they live next to each other. However, sidewalks, different from streets, they are not for getting from one place to another. They can be useful for that, but sidewalks are for talking, for playing, for doing business, for kissing. Sidewalks really are much closer relatives of parks or plazas than they are of streets. And to say that in a sidewalk there is enough space to park cars as well as for people to walk by is equivalent to saying that you could turn the main park or the main plaza of a city into an open-air parking lot so long as you leave enough space between cars for people to walk by. See, these are very subjective issues, but this is not something that we are talking about Colombia. We are talking about New York or Phoenix. We could take the cars that are parked in the curbside and get rid of this parking, make the sidewalk bigger. Why not? Who decided that we should give this space to cars? Did anybody vote? We'll go into that later. This is just to show you a small, this is politics. This is Gallup poll when I was mayor. When I arrived, see, before I was mayor, this is the blue is, do you approve or disapprove of Mayor Peñalosa? Here, 77% disapprove, 18% approve. I was public enemy number one. Happily, by the end of my term, 70% of the people had the highest positive image any mayor had in Bogota, but it's difficult. What I'm trying to say also to politicians and to societies, it's difficult to make change, especially when you're trying to make change to create more equality, even if people like it afterwards. So we make sidewalks, we make big sidewalks, big bikeways. Ideally, sidewalks should continue at grade at the intersections. So it's clear that it's cars that are entering the pedestrian space and not vice versa, that the city belongs to people, not to cars. Like in Paris here, ideally, we should have any sidewalk in the planet should at least as big that 3 wheelchairs, one next to each other, could go easily anywhere without any obstacles. Now, I'm going to show you now, this is very important what I'm going to show because, look, by the way, Colombia, we are a very poor society. We are about, if we have a very good growth rates, maybe 100 years, we'll have the income per capita the United States has. But still, there are some interesting examples. Bogota is a large city, 8 million city, twice Phoenix. And this is what I think should be in the future. Some bicycle highway, Porvenir Promenade. This is what I think the future American city may have. I'll show you. We did about a 20-mile bicycle highway through some of the areas, the very poor areas where the city was growing. See, even underground cables, underground cables, fancy, and this is, initially was like this, then the city grew around it, and this is something that completely transforms life. Look, the city is only consolidating there. It's not yet finished. But imagine what you can do with 20 miles going through a very dense city, because Phoenix has about 20 inhabitants per hectare. Bogota has 215 inhabitants per hectare. It's one of the highest density cities in the world. And to have something like this is very impressive. So you can change life, when we have these illegal neighborhoods, we first made the pedestrian part. Later, we'll pave the streets for cars. But first, pedestrians. Here, you see the parks, the pedestrian, the bicycle, and we'll pave the streets for cars later. Of course, most people in this neighborhood don't have cars. Almost no. I would love to pave the street for cars too, but I want for people to feel important, respected, not because they have a car, but because they have a national identity in their pocket, because they are a human being. I would say that any infrastructure in a city should reflect that human beings are sacred. Anything that you do in a city, the way to measure a new building or a new road or anything you do is, does it make the space around it more pleasant to be in, to walk in, to play in? That is the way. If you have a new building, the discussion is not whether the building is 20-story high or 2-story high. I think this is a very relevant discussion. We'll go into this. Much more important is, does it improve? Does it make more pleasant the space around it, more attractive? This is much more important than whether it has 20 or 30-story high or not. It's not irrelevant. So this is Porvenir Promenade. See these streets, no pavement, no pavement. All of them have running water. We have great schools that we put, everything, parks, no pavement. First, the pedestrian highway here. Now, how would your quality of life improve, even in a suburb where probably many of you live? If you would have a 50-mile pedestrian or bicycle highway a few blocks from your home to go on bicycle or just to sit there and read the paper and watch people go by, it would be fantastic. How about a city with hundreds or thousands of miles of this infrastructure like this in Germany? And it's so easy to do. If we are going to do totally new cities in the US, like we mentioned, 70 million new homes, we could do something completely different, because clearly we're not going to build everything just around where we have now. So this, like in this, it's in Berlin, this or this kind of bicycle highways in Europe. I mean, the new American city could be crisscrossed by hundreds and even thousands of miles of pedestrian and bicycle-only promenades, highways and greenways. These kind of things, it'd be very easy to do. It would change life, and it would be a pleasure to ride bicycles there. Now, another one that we did, Japanese Cooperation Agency proposed a 8-lane highway, and then we did a 35-kilometer, like a 25-mile, another greenway. We don't have time to go into the details. Another one of these. So in total, we did like about 70 miles of this in 3 years. No? How about taking 1 or 2 full lanes away from a Phoenix arterial road in order to turn into a true bicycle highway or mega 3-line promenade? I mean, this is not in Phoenix, but it's another American city. You know, I'm sure maybe there is something similar here. You know. Bicycles are serious matter, and they need serious investment in infrastructure, like they do in the Netherlands. This is not that. No, it's parking or... And it's important to remember that Denmark or Netherlands have a higher income per capita than the United States. They do not use bicycles because they are poor. They are richer than the United States. And the weather is horrible. It's not like Phoenix. This is... And still 40% of the people using bicycles. You know, Copenhagen, you know. Why do people use bicycles? Why are bicycles more used in the Netherlands or Denmark than in Italy or Spain, where the weather is better? Why? I would propose that it's because these are societies which are much more egalitarian. A rich person in Spain would never be caught dead on a bicycle. Instead, a billionaire in the Netherlands couldn't care less. He goes in an old bicycle, in a bus. So I would say societies, the cities reflect the values of a society, but at the same time they construct values. If we create bicycles ways, they construct a more egalitarian society. See what I'm trying to say? The infrastructure of a city reflects the values of a society, but it also constructs the values. We could go into this a long time, but we don't have time. A university, this is everybody goes to university by bicycle. I suppose it's the same here at the university. So I see many young people in bicycles. In the future, maybe even more, like this in the Netherlands. This is a university town, and the train station in Groningen in the Netherlands. No, it's a movie. Everybody goes to, you know, it's you know. I would say like a bay with sailboats. Even if you're not in one, this bay is more beautiful. There are sailboats. So a city with bicycles is also more beautiful. It's more sexy. It's more fun. See, even though, for example, you can even flirt on a bicycle. She doesn't pay attention, but you know, this is life. It happens. So Bogota, more bikeways in Bogota. In developing countries, to be able to ride a bicycle instead of paying for public transport will save you, a low-income person, between 15 and 40% of your income. It's huge social policy. It's extremely powerful. So I would say, this is the bikeways within Bogota, and a library we built, by the way. This is a right. You know, I would say a protected bicycle way is a symbol that shows that a citizen on a $30 bicycle is equally important to one on a $30,000 car. It constructs democracy and sustainability and all that too, but So he feels very important in his bicycle, for example. So environmental impact studies usually are required to building a new roads. We have to require human impact studies too. We have to protect lizards, fine, but we have to protect children and people as well, and we don't. This is a road financed by the World Bank in India. It has environmental impact studies, a lot of money environmental studies, but they forget there are more pedestrians and bicycles than cars. Still, they don't do any infrastructure for pedestrians or bicycles. This is typical all over the developing world. It's not like you have to hunt very hard for this. This is at least what you should have in every road. This is in Colombia, but very few of this. While highways go the shortest way from A to B, bicyclists are forced to go all around. The engineers tend to assume that bicyclists are going for the fun of it, that they are never in a hurry, you know? So we have to have the same. If we have a highway, the straight from A to B, we also have to have any urban highway, with due respect. Ideally, there should not be urban highways, but if we have, we should have bikeways, busways, and great pedestrian spaces alongside them. This is this is democracy. This is not engineering, you know. Are bicycles, are bikeways a cute architectural feature, or are they a right? I mean, today we assume that a sidewalk is a right. I am sure that here in Phoenix, in an advanced city like Phoenix, if somebody gets hit by a car in a place where there is not a sidewalk, or there is because of any reason there is no sidewalk, this person will sue government and will get a lot of money from Phoenix government, millions of dollars probably, because he has a right to have a sidewalk. Now, why not also a bikeway? I mean, the only possible means of individual mobility for many low-income people, or for a child, or a 12 or 14-year-old child, is bikeways. So I don't think this is just a cute feature. It's a right in every street, and protected bikeways, not just painted lanes. Again, why not give pedestrians and bicyclists the space taken today by curbside parking? And this is not a theoretical discussion. In New York, they have had this discussion. I think I would disagree respectfully with the United States assumption that neighbors have more right to public space than people who live far away. I think this is not a democratic assumption at all. For example, somebody may live in a 30 million apartment in front of Central Park, and a child in the farthest neighborhood in the Bronx has the same right to Central Park as the person who lives right in front of it. But unfortunately, the judges in the United States very often assume that the neighbors can organize and decide whether there is a bikeway or not in front of their homes. No. We have to do what is best for the city as a whole, not for the neighbors. I don't think the neighbors have any more right to public space around them than do cities in the other side of the city. But this is an interesting discussion, philosophical. It's important to remember also, when you get rid of this parking, people will tell the mayor, now where will I park? You know, and then the mayor can tell, you know, constitutions have many pages of rights, pages and pages. But I still have not yet found any constitution where parking is a constitutional right, you know? So the mayor can tell the person, I mean, you ask me where you should park. It's the same as if you ask me where you should keep your food or your clothes. I don't care, you know, keep it wherever you want, you know? The city has no obligation. I'm saying road space, and we will talk about it, belongs to all citizens. It does not belong more to citizens with cars than to those without cars. It does not belong more to adults than to children. It belongs the same to every human being in a city. So when we distribute road space, we will have to think about that it belongs to everybody, not to people with cars. And we'll go into that later. Now, after assuming political cost for making a bikeway like here in Phoenix, why don't you make a physically protected one, just not a painted thing where cars park and all this, you know? I mean, you may have 1 million cars respecting the bicycle lane that is painted, but what if one doesn't respect it and kill you, or kills your children? It's not so I think it's a bikeway that is not safe for an 8-year-old child or a 10-year-old child is not a bikeway. You know, this is a pre-bikeway perhaps, but not, you know, I think this is crazy, these painted bike lanes, you know. We had in Bogotá an interesting experiment. We closed 120 kilometers, about 90 miles of main arteries every Sunday. We get like 1.5 million people going out to ride bicycles. It's a very beautiful ritual of people reconquering the city. you know. We even have something else. We had a referendum and asked people to vote where they wanted a car-free day. No cars, 1 day a year. And people approved. So the first Thursday of every February, the city works without cars. An 8 million inhabitant city. And everything works fine. Everybody uses public transport. I mean, it's an interesting experiment which proves that a different life is possible. Now, transport. Let's go quickly because transport is a peculiar problem. It can get worse as society gets richer. It's different. I mean, if society gets richer in India, they will have better health, they will have better education, but traffic jams will be worse. Clearly, it's an unsustainable system. In the United States, every American city, despite these giant highways, traffic jams have been getting worse for the last 40 years. All studies show the same. Clearly, big highways do not solve traffic jams, and maybe on the contrary, they create it. Why don't highways solve traffic jams? Because what creates traffic is not just the number of cars. This is very important. What creates traffic, at least as important as the number of cars or even more, is the number of trips and the length of trips. So if you make bigger roads, people tend to go farther, to live farther, to work farther, and to make more trips. So it will never work. It's trying to try to solve traffic jams making bigger roads. It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. You know, so this is traffic jam highways all over in Shanghai or in Mexico or in Sao Paulo. No city, I mean, this is. So public transport. Why do people use public transport in the richest cities in the world, like Zurich or London? Why do people use public transport in New York? It's because they love public transport. Have you been to the New York subway? It doesn't even have electric stairways. If you need an elevator, you will waste half a day finding the elevator to the station. And once you find it, you may discover that somebody else did it before and thought it was a toilet. You know? You go down in the summer and it's extremely hot, these stations. It's so hot, it's so unpleasant. And it's full of giant rats, you know? Last year, 46 people were killed in the tracks in New York subway. 46 people were killed because they were pushed or fell or jumped or whatever. I mean, it's not, and then to ride underground is not the most pleasant. Why do people use public transport? Because, you know why? It's not because they love the environment. It's because they have to. Anywhere where people use public transport is because there are severe restrictions to using private cars. Because it's too difficult to park or it's too slow to use the car or some reason. But so you have to use public transport. It's not because you love it. So you have to have carrot and the stick. You have to have great public transport as good as possible, but you also have to restrict car use more and more and more. Mobility and traffic jams. It's very important to understand this. Public transport will solve mobility. Light rail or subways or BRT will solve mobility, but it will not solve traffic jams. You can have a subway under every street. London has more than 1,200 miles of subway and suburban rail. And still they had to charge for car use because there were too many traffic jams. So the only way to solve traffic jams is restricting car use. Restricting it with congestion charging, such as in London, increase cost of using cars. I mean, ideally, if cars create so many problems, you should charge more for car use and subsidize more public transport. The most obvious charge to car use is to have much higher gasoline taxes. I know this is sinful in the US, but this is very rational. It's obvious. You should charge more to car use and subsidize public transport. But the most obvious way to restrict car use is to restrict parking. And not just parking in public streets. In London, in central London, for the last 40 years, you have not been allowed to do parking in the main buildings. You see all these fancy buildings, central London, none of them have parking, all these offices buildings. Everybody has to go by public transport. Now, let's go quickly. The only economic possibility to reach all sectors of cities with transit is BRT, buses on exclusive lanes. Trams are very nice, they are very beautiful, but the tram here costs $70 million per mile. And this is way too expensive. But moreover, buses do more. You know, we could go, in 1940, every city with more than 100,000 inhabitants had trams. Every city. Bogota, of course, I'm sure Phoenix, every city in 1940. And then what happened? Buses appeared and trams disappeared in a matter of 10 or 15 years. And it was not because this legend that or this story that General Motors bought a few tram systems and scrapped them. No, it's because trams had a very bad image of being systems for the poor. So now buses is the same. Buses have a bad image. Buses are for Colombians, for Mexicans, for African Americans. And if we want to attract yuppies, BMW driving yuppies into public transport, so we have to put trams. Well, it's nice, it's cute, but the problem is that it's very expensive. You are never going to be able to go very far if you use trams. Buses do more. Subways are wonderful also. Great, who could say subways is bad? But first we should give democratically, why put public transport users underground? Why don't we give them exclusive lanes for buses in this? We should put cars underground, but not public transport. I mean, after we put public transport in the roads, and still is not enough, let's put them underground. But at least first we give them the road space. This is Washington subway, and the stairway was broken. So you have to walk all the way up there. Why do you have to put public transport? And this, of course, in Washington needs a nuclear bomb refuge and all these things. It's true. So anyway, it's much nicer to be above ground, like this BRT in Cali, Colombia, It's nicer. You go to see the city, the trees, the light. It's more pleasant. Or in a tram, it's nice. Guangzhou's BRT, for example, the Guangzhou BRT in China is a 12 million inhabitant city. Is moving more passengers our direction than all subway lines in China, except for Beijing number 2. The advantage of these buses have many advantages over subways. For example, before they enter this, they go into irregular through the neighborhoods. They get people near where they live, and they can also leave this. So it's like a subway that could go around the neighborhoods and enter the trunkway. And once they get in the trunkway, they are as fast as a subway, basically. We can go if we have time. Bogota Transmilenio moves 47,000 passengers our direction. The highest capacity, the tram in the United States that is moving the most passengers our direction, moving about 3,000. So with all due respect, it's almost a toy next to the BRT. It's less, this Transmilenio moves more than 10 times. And of course, again, I love trams. They're beautiful. I think it's perfect. You do 1, you do 2, you do 3. But if you really want to go all over the city, you will also do something lower cost. And it can do beautiful, This is Bogota, of course, horrible traffic jams, but on the other hand, this is a beautiful symbol. By the way, I like to say, before I am mistaken, Bogota is a mess. I don't want you to think Bogota, I'm not coming here to say Bogota is an example of anything. It's a mess. We just did 2 or 3 experiments, which are interesting, that's all. And I have to tell you about them because otherwise they will not invite me here. Buses can spur private investment. This is a very nice system they did in Cleveland, Ohio. Very nice BRTs. Could work for you, the planners of Phoenix, to go and look at this. Or this is the one in Denver. Now, all new, I don't like malls very much, but all new malls, about 10 malls in Bogota have been done in the BRT line. The corridor in BRT increases tremendously land prices. See, they even put signs. If you buy here, and then you will get the increase in value added increase because of the Transmilenio bus. That's what it says, that sign. Here is the biggest company in construction, the biggest developer in Bogota. This is the way. They buy 2 pages in the magazines, and they put the map of the BRT, and they locate their projects near the BRT because their studies show that by far the most important attraction for anybody to buy an apartment is to be near the Transmilenio trunkways. So that's exactly the same thing as the subway or the tram does, if it's well done with great architecture and all of this. And of course, I don't misunderstand me. I love trams. They're beautiful and they're great, and I congratulate you with the tram you have. But unfortunately, it's expensive. And if you really want to go to many more places in the city, you may complement it with bus systems. They say that trams will stimulate investment, spur investment. Well, this is in Portland. And this is it's like a 15-year-old tramway, and still empty parking lots next to the tram. Again, empty parking lots next to the tram in Portland. So the development has not totally been exactly booming. Moreover, here we have Salt Lake City, one of the first cities in the United States that had trams. And it looks like a bombed out city. It's full of parking lots all over the place. You know, it's like, so clearly trams did not stimulate any investment, you know. So maybe what happened in Portland is not just the trams, but let's go quickly into other things. But basically the issue, I love trams or buses, the issue is that mobility is a political decision. If you are able to take the political decision to give car lanes to public transport, you will solve the problem. Of course, it takes a little more than that, but it's basically it. Let's go quickly. I could prove to you that bus system can be even faster than a subway. But for example, for some reason, when two lines cross in a subway, you have to get out of the subway, walk, and wait for the next train to come by. So it takes a lot of time. Also, if you need to move 10,000 passengers out of direction, you may need 4 trains or 100 buses. So the frequency is much higher. The waiting time is much less in a bus system. There are many stations are much closer to each other in bus system than in subways, so the walking time is shorter. But anyway, let's go quickly. This is in Brisbane in Australia, a very nice BRT system too. Let's go quickly. Buses, yeah, we already talked about this. Buses on exclusive lanes. Highways. Highways should have exclusive lanes for buses, like this one in Istanbul. Now, road space is a city's most valuable resource. Here in Phoenix, you could find oil or diamonds underground, and it's not as valuable as road space. So, how should we distribute road space between pedestrians, public transport and private cars, and bicycles? This is London, for example. See, more space for pedestrians than to... This is a political decision. I am not telling you how you should distribute it. It's your political decision. All I am trying to say, there is nothing legal or technical about it. This is a political decision, how you distribute this resource that belongs to all society. Very narrow streets in Paris, for example. And still, I can assure you, this real estate here is one of the most expensive in the planet. So it's not exactly that you need big roads to have successful cities. Now, let's go quickly. We don't have time to go quickly. These typical suburbs. The typical suburbs. Low cost, high frequency public transport. We cannot have low cost, high frequency public transport here. This is a picture I took from the plane and landing in Houston. You know? How can you have a train or a bus that goes very quickly, every 2 or every 3 or every 5 minutes by here? Through where? I mean, people will have to walk, you know? So, clearly we need low density, of course, means high global warming. You are all experts in the problems with suburbs, of course, but we must remember also that suburbs are especially boring. There is nobody in the streets, you know? I mean, any 14-year-old son, you know, you see the people when they get the car here in the United States. Now, with high density, everything works. Bicycles, pedestrian, light rail, subways, buses, everything works well. So now, what would a desirable density be? What is a good density? What is high enough? I will propose something very simple. If you have open-air parking lots, it means that the land prices are too low. You can afford to waste your land parking cars there. So you will have the right density when you cannot afford to have open-air parking lots any longer. That's when you reach a correct density. If you are able to afford this, is clearly land is too cheap, density is too low. Now, the United States' greatest urban and environmental challenge for the 21st century is to create denser city, which will offer what people like in suburbs, green and safe spaces, to turn the inner suburbs now. But we don't want just density. Most Americans would not want this. I don't think people in Phoenix would like to live this, like this is Hong Kong. So we think suburbs are not good, but clearly we don't like to live in Manhattan either. So where? What kind of city? Where? How are we going to build the 17 million new homes that we want or that we need? The new dense city cannot be about tall towers surrounded by narrow sidewalks. It has to be a pedestrian's heaven, a paradise for children and the elderly. The buildings which follow may be fine. This is the new yuppie buildings in American cities, which everywhere you have a few and they are hailed as a great success. And of course they are, but this is Portland. I mean, do you think this is where, I mean, this is paradise? You know, a child, this is the great density downtown. So a child, you assume you have a 10-year-old child, he comes out and then maybe this little sidewalk there, you know, cars. Is this the paradise that we want for the future American city for the next 4,000 years? That's it? I don't think so. I'm not so excited. Or even this, like in Manhattan, this is what we want, these 9 little, I mean, Manhattan may be fun for adults and all, but this is not exactly the paradise we want for the future of the United States or the world. This is Portland again, you know. This is great yuppies living there downtown, you know. But is this, I mean, maybe a few people will go there, but clearly this is not what people will be happy with. I mean, this is not what will replace the suburbs. It doesn't seem to me. So, buildings in the new American city could be surrounded, at least in one side, by formidable pedestrian spaces. Children would walk out of homes into pedestrian spaces, into networks hundreds of miles long of greenways and bicycle highways. Like this. This is in Battery Park City in Manhattan. But this is just an example, you know. Here, the green in one side. Imagine this goes for 50 miles, this greenway. And in the other side, the cars, fine. And then another building, and then another greenway. And then, you know, things like this. You know, is it possible to provide what people seek in the suburbs and much more in much higher densities? This is in Toronto, for example, in Vancouver. You know, here again, very long greenway. In the other side, the cars. The new density cannot be just for adults like Manhattan. It should be for happy children who will ride bicycles to school, shops, friends' homes, through greenways hundreds of miles long. Like this is a greenway to some Dutch city, dozens of kilometers long. Every other street could be pedestrian and bicycle only. This is just an example. I'm not saying this is what should be or not, but imagine a city like this, like Manhattan, would be one street only pedestrian and bicycle, one for cars. One pedestrian, you know, something like this. Very simple. This isn't rocket science. I mean, of course, architects and designers will do something much more intelligent and more creative. But basic is the concept of the new city. This could be hundreds of kilometers of these things. But Jane Jacobs traumatized Americans. She was brilliant and taught us all. I mean, we all have learned from Jane Jacobs. But on the other hand, they said, oh, now whenever we're going to demolish something, say 2 neighbors say hello to each other. So this is a vibrant community. We cannot demolish that. Now look, I mean, we can do cities in 2 different ways. One is just changing the regulation, allowing houses to become high-rises. And the other one is totally demolish huge areas and redo the city completely. While in the United States, nothing has been done in the last 50 years, mainly because people are paralyzed by fright of demolishing. Everything is conservation, everything is vibrant community, nothing can be done, you know. In Europe, they have done hundreds of projects. One of the most important reasons why was for the London Olympics. They had huge demolitions and they redid a whole area of the city, and very successful. When I was a student, graduate student in Paris, in the center of Paris, and about 40 hectares around where I lived were demolished, and fantastic new projects were done in the center of Paris. So, to redo things, I mean, the fact that some things fail and Jane Jacobs rightly criticized him doesn't mean that we cannot do anything anymore forever, you know? The new American city could also be crisscrossed by hundreds of miles of roads for buses only, or trams only. These greenways with buses or trams. They will make formidable low-cost transit system, like this in Bogota. Only buses and pedestrians. But imagine this for 100 miles. Or in the Netherlands, in Bogota again, things like this. Only trams, only buses and pedestrians for 100 kilometers. This is the new American city that I would dream about. Things like this. Very simple. This is an example. This is an idea for Manhattan. Central Park maybe not so wide, but all the way from the northern tip to the southern tip. Imagine something like this. Green along the water, no roads, no highways, no FDRs, you know, Parks across also. Oh, okay. 10? Okay, I'll be, let's see, 5 minutes and I'm finished. I am being ordered by Aaron. Now, some bus rapid transit streets, you know. This is just an idea, of course, this is, and I'm proposing. Where will the American, now, I've already said how I think the new city could be, the new American city. Now the question is where? Where will we build this new city? And I would propose to you very irreverently that this should be done demolishing suburbs, well-located suburbs, and redo them. This is not so simple. Almost every 80% of buildings in the planet, of high-rise buildings in the planet, have been built where before there were houses. So it's not so simple. Every single high-rise in Manhattan is built where before there were houses. Why did people sell those houses? Because it was good business. They made a lot of money selling it. It was great business for them to sell it. So it's not so terrible to propose that we may demolish things and do something different and better. And here we are using eminent domain, and I think it should be used for the most important reason ever it would have been used, for human survival, in order to stem off global warming, to do sustainable, transit-efficient cities. Now, let's go. We have to demolish things like this and completely redo them. Demolish completely, redo the streets, redo the whole thing. I mean, it's not so sacred. Of course, we will say, let's go quickly, I don't have time. Even in many inner suburbs in the United States, they are completely run down, derelict. I was last year in this, what I'm going to show you, in Birmingham, Alabama, but there are very similar ones in Philadelphia, very similar ones in Baltimore, very similar, completely collapsed. And still nothing is done. Everybody's paralyzed by fright to do anything. This is collapse, you know, this is crumbling down. And still nothing is done because maybe again it's a lively, vibrant community, you know. Schools are closed, boarded up schools. I mean, this is 2 miles away from the most fantastic university, downtown Birmingham, University of Alabama, where very fancy professors come, famous doctors, famous researchers. 2 miles away, you could demolish hundreds of hectares and redo a whole new city for the people who live there and for others who would come. Mixed community, mixed income, mixed uses with hundreds of pedestrians, street only bicycle, only. So easy. But why nobody dares? You know, there was a fantastic favorable ruling in New London, Connecticut, and many states, including Arizona, rushed to expedite new regulations that would not allow this thing to happen again there. Now, if high density for the 73 million new homes to be built in the United States over the next 38 years is not achieved in the existing suburbs, where is it to be achieved? Where? Where are we going to build the 73 million? Or actually, we may build the traditional buildings on top of the streets, but that would not be very exciting. We are designing not cities, we are designing the future lives and the future happiness of Americans. So, not just derelict suburbs, we can demolish normal, nice, successful suburbs. And they will be a great business. These people would sell their homes and maybe have enough money to buy 3 homes like that. No? Now, 2 ways of turning suburbs into high-density environments. Simply change regulations, allow buildings. And the other one, large projects and eminent domain. And you could do things like this, or better, without even cars. I mean, but this is just some nice areas. You know, this is like in Berlin. Nice densities, you know. New York, you know, things like this. You know, in Toronto, in Vancouver. It was easy to find these pictures. There are many around the world, nice areas. For the second way of doing suburbs, where we could do a totally new city, which would be an example to the world, there is no examples yet. Large areas would have to be acquired, demolished, and redone with radically different model. Now, when the central city becomes attractive, again, there are discussions about which height to permit to buildings. Let's go. Again, as I mentioned, more important than the height of buildings is what happens at the ground floor. This is a disaster. Famous architect in New York, Frank Gehry. I mean, you want to walk and you don't even see there, you know? But of course, he's a star. And I respect him. He has done fantastic things. But this is not a pleasant thing to walk in front of. This is nice. Windows, gardens, people. This is nice. For example, who knows if this building where these people are, which by the way is my son and my wife, are 60-story high or 6-story high or 3-story high? How do you know? Who cares? What is important is what happens at the ground floor. It's much more important, you know? What happens at the ground floor? You know, like Rockefeller Center in New York or whatever. Now I finished. No, thank you.
This presentation is brought to you by Arizona State University's Global Institute of Sustainability for educational and non-commercial use only.